I invite you to pray with me now. Lord, fall afresh on our spirits this day. We claim your presence in this place as we lift our hearts and minds to you. In exchange, we ask that you speak to us this day in whatever form you choose, but speak to us. For we are listening for your word. May our hearts and our meditations of our minds be pleasing to you, for you are strength and our Redeemer. Amen. It's a question of relevance. Those were the words spoken to me by a very talented, service-minded young professional who has left the faith of his youth and the church he always loved. The reason? Kevin, he said, I just don't think that the church is speaking to what weighs most heavily on me in this season. It's a question of relevance. As I bit my tongue to try to avoid any defensive remarks that came to mind and tried to listen more deeply, I realized that his petition was not hostility towards the church, but rather a disappointment, maybe even a longing that perhaps the church could speak to that heaviness, that this faith we claim might have something relevant to say about life as this man and his young family experienced it in the world. I think that's what we're trying to do here at Harvard Avenue Christian Church, is to be a multi-generational church that harnesses the wisdom and power of the gospel in a way that connects to younger generations so we can raise up a new generation of faithful who want to live and love like Jesus and understand that following in the ways of Jesus makes life better. And if we're going to do that work, then we're really in for some commitment that requires listening deeply and asking questions of youth, young adults, and these fledgling families about what their expressed needs are, what challenges they face and must overcome. Today, I want to address one of those issues that is pervasive for my generation, and that is the issue of busyness. So speaking directly to my peers here, what does the role of faith have to do in our frantic activity? Do we believe that this is something we do to check off the box, or is it possible that our faith has something relevant to teach us about how to navigate this fast-paced world we live in? That's what I want to talk about today. And to set the tone, what better word than one of Scripture, right? This one comes from the Gospel of Mark, the 6th chapter, just a couple of verses 30 through 32. Here begins the reading. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place, all by themselves. Here ends the reading. And how is it almost already September? The summer has come and gone, school's in full swing, and so with it a slew of activities to add to an already overbooked schedule. I think about the tears that I have shed about that very thing. We worry about the time and how it's flied, and perhaps if we've been spending that time well. About a year ago, I was talking with a mother in our congregation as we were coming out of the pandemic into a new normal and grieving together about how the calendar was beginning to fill and the anxiety and overwhelm that was accompanying that. She named the temptation of busyness. But, she said, I don't want you to feel like I'm avoiding the church. It's just another thing we have to balance now. How do you keep your priorities clear as the schedule picks up again. I wonder about the role of faith for people with such little bandwidth, such thin margins. Because the truth is, with rare exception, everyone in my generation is busy. More than busy, exhausted, too wiped at the end of the day to do anything more than stress eat, binge watch Hulu, or doom scroll through a social media feed. You see, even though we're all very busy, we often really don't know why. We're not at least able to articulate it very clearly. And if we, the church, are going to speak into busyness, then we probably need to consider what our relationship is to it. For some people, busyness, for many people, busyness is just survival in our culture. It's holding down 3 jobs to provide for the family. It's moving kids back and forth to school and activity while both parents hold down full-time jobs. Gone are the days of single-income households, but all for the wealthiest of my generation. No, we're not calling this kind of busyness anything other than it is. It's survival, often paycheck to paycheck, in hopes that you don't get left behind. But still, for others, this busyness is distraction. It's just another way to avoid asking more critical questions of life in this world we live in. Heaven forbid that we slow down enough to ask what the purpose and meaning of all this is, if this activity is even worth our time. And we all know how productive you can be when you're avoiding something. Author Tim Kreider offers a lot of good essays, in my opinion, about the concept of busyness, and he offers this analogy for which I find myself exposed, something I'm simultaneously guilty and grateful of. He says this: "We are currently experiencing the civilizational equivalent of that anxiety you feel when you have something due the next day and you haven't even started thinking about it. And yet still sit there helplessly watching whole seasons of mediocre TV while your brain screams at you to do something." If you felt that debilitating anxiety, you know exactly what he means. And then for others of us, for a lot of us, busyness is actually a symbol of importance. It was speculated some time ago that the ultimate symbol of success in this day and age would be to have unlimited leisure time. But the opposite is actually true. It's a badge of honor to be considered needed in all activities, that your intellect is wanted. And so, in this regard, busyness is something we both complain and brag about maintaining. Again, Tim Kreider wrote about this time where there was experienced this shift not long ago in retooling the concept of busyness as some kind of virtue, that we would brag about our overscheduled lives, that we would join in what another writer referred to as the cult of busy. So for decades now, the church has been trying to wedge itself into our overscheduled lives. Yes, we too joined the cult of busy with enthusiasm, pumping out programming, activities, classes, groups, mission projects as fast as we could, hoping to claim a prize space on your schedules. But I wonder about that approach. I wonder if we've scheduled more activity without increasing fulfillment. I wonder if we've added things to the to-do list without adding encounters with God, that perhaps we've at times abdicated the call of faith while chasing feverishly after the idol of busyness. I've come to believe that what my generation needs is not more activity, that we need tools for discernment. We need tools like Sabbath, a space of rest, to pause and understand what we're doing and what our priorities are. We need time for spiritual disciplines like prayer to communicate with God and get a game plan for what our lives are to be about. Perhaps this space, this time here in worship, might be one of those tools that we can use for discernment that allows us to better orient ourselves and disrupt the cult of busyness which threatens to consume us. The verses I just read from the Gospel of Mark, you heard the disciples were eager to come around their leader and tell them about all they had done and taught, about how productive and effective they had been in their ministry. In my assessment, they sound like card-carrying members of the cult of busy, and Jesus is not impressed. In fact, rather than congratulating them, he senses a more basic need and invites them to a time of rest. Come away, he says. Well, those plans are actually thwarted. The opportunity is postponed because it says then the apostles were headed out, and a great crowd, many saw them coming and recognized them and hurried there on foot from all the other towns, arrived ahead of them. And as they went ashore, they saw a great crowd. And so what do? The compassionate response. They feed 5,000 people. The rest delayed, but not denied. We read after that, immediately after that, he made his disciples get in the boat and go ahead to the other side to Bethsaida. While he dismissed the crowd, after saying farewell to them, he went up on the mountain to pray. In the thick of the temptation to stay at it, Jesus set himself out of the rapidly moving current. He climbed the mountain. He prayed. Which probably seems odd to many of us. After all, Jesus has just performed his biggest miracle to date in front of thousands, no less. If he knew what he was doing, he would know this is the right moment to build his status, to mobilize his base, to increase his popularity. He's missing a golden opportunity, except busy is not the goal, and it should never be when it comes to faith. A beloved pastor and author, Eugene Peterson, wrote an article many decades ago. It had the tongue-in-cheek title, "The Unbusy Pastor," and with a direct subtitle that said this: "The word busy is not a symptom of commitment, but of betrayal." Ouch. As I read those words from a then young pastor, I find myself, as he spoke about how the calendar builds up with activities without deepening our walk of faith or strengthening our relationship to Christ. Worried about the way that the church, with the best of intentions, can sometimes prioritize busyness over these encounters with God. In my own experience, those encounters come only when I slow down enough to recognize them, when I stop long enough to acknowledge them, pause to welcome them. So what if at Harvard Avenue Christian Church, our life together did not simply add items to our to-do list or lengthen our obligations, but what if the things we are doing in our life together deepened our sense of God's presence? What if the spiritual disciplines that we have named as our core practices, things like daily prayer, weekly worship, honoring a Sabbath time, what if those were not just things to be seen as getting done, but rather the practices that disrupt the busyness and reorient us to the things that matter most in life? Now, you likely know that after a long season of waiting, Jody and I joyfully welcomed a baby boy into our household. This is Isaiah, and he's 7 months old at this point. He's changing faster than we can keep track of. and he's starting to learn some of the things that Dad loves most, so that's exciting. But even in all this change, we've already established some helpful rhythms, including one we called the evening turn-down service. It's where Jody and I take a chance to alternate feeding him and reading to him and singing to him before he goes to bed. It's a tender time, a time to slow down and appreciate the gift of being together. Now, I believe that. I believe that with all my heart. And yet, only a few weeks ago, during this time, I was reading to Isaiah when it occurred to me that Isaiah is, about 7 months old. And that means that he doesn't probably know the words on the page that I'm reading in the book. And so, clever, I began to skip words and then sentences and then pages. I thought, well, heck, I can get this book done in a matter of seconds. And the sooner I get the book done, the sooner I can put him down. And the sooner I put him down, the sooner I can clean the kitchen. And the sooner I can clean the kitchen, I can answer all the emails. And the sooner I answer the emails, I can take out the trash. The sooner I was proud of this new finding, this increase in efficiency at the end of the day. And then it hit me in my attempt to trick my infant son and rush on to the next thing. I was neglecting the most meaningful part of my day. How often do we fail to cherish the holy moments when they're right in front of us? How often do we rush past the presence of God when it is in our very midst? Jesus dismissed the crowd. He climbed the mountain, he prayed. In the midst of overwhelming demand on his time, Jesus stepped away to gain perspective, to discern the next move, to simply be with his God. It's no doubt that he was tempted by busyness and productivity. He was Jesus, but he chose to rest in the presence of God. I think that is how prayer and worship and honoring a Sabbath time can shape us, not by adding things to our list of obligations, but sharpening our senses over time to the presence of God in every moment. So that on Tuesday morning at breakfast, you might recognize God's presence because you spent some time here sharpening the tools and cultivating those for discernment. Friends, I am no longer interested in filling your schedules or mine with religious busy work. I don't need sheepish excuses of folks who feel guilty for missing a service or an activity or an event. What we're about here, friends, is as a church is not creation of more work which must be done. It's pursuing the way of Jesus that is intended to point us to the purpose of prayer, the gift of a worshipful attitude, the truth of the gospel, which doesn't come on our schedules or all at once, but over time, with practice, in community. We need a Sabbath, a space to discern our priorities. We need the sustaining gift of time set aside with God. We need community that seeks God's will and encourages us to slow down, dismiss the crowd, climb the mountain, pray. I'm convinced that this life that we've been given is far too short and way too sacred to always be spinning our wheels. So here's the invitation. As the schedule starts to pick up, the calendar spaces get filled, and you feel that stress and anxiety begin to rise, I invite you to do things that will subvert the cult of busy before it consumes you. Join for an hour of worship. Calendar off a space for Sabbath, for retreat. Pray. Because Jesus offers us life abundant, a joy-filled life that is right here for us to claim, no expense needed. Not as a reward for getting everything else done. Friends, receive that gift. Amen.